Okay, so 6.3 and 6.4 essentially are factoring trinomials, deals with factoring trinomials when the a is not 1. So we want to make sure we remember from the previous sections, we have the descending order. So ax squared plus bx plus c is the form of the quadratic. So let's look at this example we have on the side on this sheet. We have 2x squared plus 7x plus 5. So the method that I'm going to show you on this video is called the AC method. And the AC method essentially uses grouping for you to be able to factor the trinomial. So when you're doing the AC method, you make sure that your problem is in descending order, which is what you should always do when you factor. The next thing is we want to check for a GCF. So we factor out a GCF if one exists. So if it's possible, then that's what you should do. The next thing you will do is you will find A times C. All right, so we're finding A times C. So actually there's steps on this sheet here, right? So when we're factoring by grouping, once we make sure we have it in descending order, make sure that we factor out the greatest common factor if one exists. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to find what A times C is. So what is AC? So in this particular example, my A is 2 and my C is 5. So we're going to multiply A times C. So our A times C is equal to a positive 10, not plus or minus. A times C is equal to positive 10, okay? So what we do, now we revert back to the same process we used for 6.2 when we were just factoring regular trinomials when the A is equal to 1. What did we do then? We took the factors of the C term and we looked for factors of C that can add or subtract to create the B term, which is the one in the middle. So what we're doing now is we're doing the same process, but instead of just having C, C is now A times C, right? Because our A is no longer a 1. So in the previous section, when A was 1, 1 times C just gives you C. Here our A is not going to be 1. And so A times C is some other value other than the C. So in this particular example, our A times C is a 10. So we need factors of 10 that can somehow create a 7 through additional subtraction, right? So if you go through the process, so we want to find two numbers that when we multiply, we get 10, positive 10, and when we add, we get positive 7. And so this is where we do our scratch work. So what are the pairs? So 1 and 10, they can't give us 7. 2 and 5, yeah, I think that'll work. Remember, you want to make sure you double check. So what's that mean? Well, let's see. If I do positive 2 plus 5, that'll give me a positive 7. Check. If I multiply a positive 2 times a positive 5, that'll give me a positive 10. Check. So you need to double check, which means whatever the numbers are with their signs, you should be able to create the middle term, and then you should be able to multiply to create your AC. So now that I know that my numbers are going to be a positive 2 and a positive 5, here is where we have a new setup. Once you find your two values, you are going to create a 4-term polynomial. So what does that look like? My 2x squared stays what it is. My plus 5 also stays what it is. What's happening is we are creating and finding the two terms that created this 7x in the first place. And what we found is that a positive 2x would do it and a 5x would do it. So what you're going to do is you're going to use whatever that middle term is, and you're going to substitute in the two numbers you just found when you found those factors. So now what my polynomial, I'm looking at 2x squared plus 2x plus 5x plus 5. Well, this is 4 terms. So we go back to our 6.1 that tells us we can factor this by grouping. Well, what is factoring by grouping? Well, we just split the problem. So we factor by grouping. So we split the problem in half, and then we factor out the greatest common factor for each part. So GCF here would be x, 2x. Yes, 2x. Be careful. Trust, it's easy to make a mistake. So let me erase this. That's why we use pencil, so we can erase. So my GCF is 2x, and in my parentheses, I'm going to have an x plus a 1. In my second group, I know my GCF is going to be positive, and it's going to be a positive 5. So remember, that's like a dividing out. So then x plus 1. So when you factor by group, and remember, my two sets of parentheses should match each other, and they do. So x plus 1 times 2x plus 5. And we're done. And remember, it's factoring, so we can always check by just distributing our problem through. 2x squared plus 5x plus 2x plus 5, 2x squared plus 7x plus 5. Oh my God, I got back the original problem. I know I did my problem correct. Okay, so when we're factoring these trinomials, we have to know our process. So when you see it, you have to know what to do when. All right, so let's do another one. Okay, so here we have 6x squared minus 13x plus 6. So what does that mean? So it's in descending order, check. There's not a greatest common factor, right? Because everybody would have to have something in common other than a 1. And then we're going to look for our a times c, okay? So a times c here would be 6 times 6. So our AC is a positive 36. So we're looking for factors of 36 that will do what? Give us the negative 13. So when I start listing my numbers, I think the 9 and the 4 can work. So what does that mean? That means we got to make sure that we can add or subtract to create the negative 13 and multiply to create the positive 36. So because my product is positive, this is where when you know your multiplication rules is going to help you. So because I know the product is positive, you can only get a positive product if the signs of your factors are the same. So I know the 9 and the 4 have to either both be positive or both be negative. So when I look at my middle term, it's a negative 13. So I'm going to try negative 9 and negative 4, which is negative 13. And if I multiply those two numbers together, I get positive 36. Double check. Once I know I got double checks, I know I have my factors. So now I just go back to my problem, and I'm going to create my 4-term polynomial. All of your work is scratch work, right? So I'm going to plug in. So 6x squared stays the same. But I'm no longer using the negative 13x. I am now using the factors that I have found. And it doesn't matter who you put first or who you put second. So the negative 9x minus the 4x would come together to create the negative 13x, right? But remember, what are we doing? We're going back to what it was before I multiplied it, right? So that's what we're doing. We're going backwards, right? Because when we multiplied it, we would distribute, then we would combine like terms, and then we would end up with what that original problem was. So now we're just going backwards. That's what factoring is. So now I have my 4-term polynomial. I'm going to split it. So my GCF for my first group would be a 3x. So that would leave me with 2x minus a 3. In my second group, my GCF would be negative, right? And it would be a 2 that comes out, and that would leave me with 2x. Remember, you're dividing through by a negative 2. Watch your signs. So negative 3. And I know it's right because my first parenthesis was 2x minus 3. So 2x minus 3 times 3x minus 2. And I'm finished. And of course, if you want to check it, you can. Just double distribute it through. 6x squared minus 4x minus 9x plus 6. 6x squared minus 13x plus 6. Done. All right, and that's factoring trinomials when your a is not equal to 1. AC method.